Welcome to Therapist Confidential, a psychotherapy.net podcast. And now, here's your host, Travis Heath.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Therapist Confidential podcast. I'm your host, Travis Heath, and today we have another Therapist Confidential short. Today we're going to talk about therapists as people. Your therapist is a person, believe it or not. Fortunately or unfortunately, we are humans. Your therapist has a day that is going on that exists outside of the session that's happening, right? This is true for every therapist. Maybe as therapists, we argued with our partner earlier that day. Maybe we were stuck in traffic. There's a lot of that in Southern California, right? And are feeling irritated or annoyed by it. Maybe we're tired. Maybe we feel a sense of pride about something happening in our world. Maybe we feel a sense of worry. Maybe there was a session that happened just prior to the one that we're in now, and that left something stirring in us. I mean, it goes on, right? We are human beings. And I think sometimes it's easy for us to forget that. It's almost like we become therapeutic bots or something. And also, it can be hard for the people that we're working with and that we're serving to remember that we have this whole life that's happening in our world. This happens sometimes for me as an instructor with students as well. I remember one time several years back, a student saw me in the grocery store and they were like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. It's, you buy groceries," they said. And I kind of chuckled and was like, well, yeah, right. And, she just sort of said, well, it's easy to forget, right? And I think the same is true of therapists. I mean, we're doing things in our life every day. And so there can be this kind of blank slate myth that still persists, which I'll say a little bit more about in a minute. And it also, ties back to this idea of neutrality. That somehow good therapy requires neutrality. I would argue neutrality is impossible. Because neutrality itself is to assume a position, right? Like if I'm to assume a neutral position, that is a position. And the fact of the matter is we as therapists aren't neutral. Hopefully we are in a place where we're able to stay with you, right? I mean, the psychologized language there would be like regulated, hopefully we're regulated enough ourselves to stay with you. But the fact of the matter is therapy is two human beings that are meeting, right? And it's not just two human beings, at least at its best, it's not just two human beings who are exchanging ideas. It's actually two nervous systems that are coming into contact with one another. So what are the sorts of things we bring into the room? I mean, one, in every session we bring in our own moods, our own emotional states. And, there's this idea that therapists should be regulated, which, that word, such a psychologized word, it's not my favorite, but I understand where it's coming from, right? But just because we're regulated doesn't mean we're emotionless, right? I mean, to be moved, to be tired, to be hopeful, it goes on and on. All of that is normal. I think maybe the exercise here for us as therapists is noticing it, metabolizing it, and not pretending like it's not there. We have our moods. We have our histories. If you want to use more psychologized language, we have our attachment histories. We have grief in our histories. We have shame. We have this sort of unfinished edges. And this work as a therapist doesn't require that we erase our histories. But we probably should be aware of them, such that the history doesn't dominate or get in the way of the work of the session, right? I mean, if a person is working with a therapist and that therapist has never felt jealousy, loss, insecurity, rage, insert other emotion here that, somehow we as therapists aren't supposed to feel but are actually greatly human, right? But if we have a therapist that hasn't felt things like jealousy, insecurity, loss, rage, etc., that's actually a cause for concern, right? Because these are normal human emotions. We as therapists have culture, race, class, gender, sexuality, religion, or lack thereof. We are shaped by the same systems. And I think sometimes what gets called clinical objectivity could actually just be unexamined normativity, right? And normativity isn't necessarily therapeutic. And if we're not careful, therapy can steer people to being more normal beings. I can talk more about that on another podcast episode. But as therapists, we're not above culture, right? We are cultured beings like everyone else. We have blind spots. Every person has blind spots. Every therapist then has blind spots. And so the difference between a therapist who may cause harm and a therapist who is helpful isn't the absence of blind spots. It's more the willingness to examine them when we become aware of them. And boy, doing this job, we will encounter our blind spots, that's for sure. We as therapists, we have preferences. We have theoretical leanings. Oh, do we have theoretical leanings? Those go on for days. We have some structure of and sense of love, right? We have emotional depth. And in fact, some therapists prefer emotional depth. That's what they think the work should be about. Others don't have that same preference. Some therapists tolerate or even prefer a more chaotic sort of therapeutic experience where others want much more structure. We all have our preferences in the world. And those preferences, whether we acknowledge them or not, do shape the work that we do. So our humanity is not incompetence. We can be deeply human and we can also be ethical. Now that asks something of us, of course, but we can be both. So those are just some, right? Mood, history, culture, blind spots, preferences. These are all examples of things that we as therapists are bringing into the session, each session we have. And, it's sort of an interesting cocktail that shows up a little differently in each session, in each day and each hour. Now, earlier I was talking about the blank slate myth. This idea that with each session we come in as a blank slate, as this neutral, stoic blank slate. Why does such a myth persist? I mean, I think one reason is safety. I mean, the idea that a therapist is neutral can feel safe to clients. It can also bring along this idea that nothing really personal is happening, and that can feel safer. It may not actually be useful for the work we're doing, but it can feel at least safer on the surface. Professionalization, right? This idea that a blank slate is somehow professional. I mean, early psychoanalysis moralized neutrality. Whether we like that or not, they definitely moralized neutrality. And also then, emotional distance can sometimes be equated with rigor, the rigor of the work that we're doing. Our professional identities get tied to like composure, and how we keep our composure. So all of these are ideas of professionalism and are definitely entangled with the blank slate myth, or at least I would call it a myth. And then, there's the fear of power misuse. We do have power as therapists, and certainly we have to acknowledge self-disclosure can be misused. And neutrality in some ways could be a guardrail there, right? I do want to say that we have to balance safety, of course, but safety and sort of the feeling of being alive in a therapeutic encounter, in a conversation, those aren't always the same things. So in some ways, yes, neutrality can, or at least perceived neutrality, can prevent harm, but it can also prevent depth of the work that we're doing and a certain humanity to it. So clients feel what's going on with us, and often before it's even named. They sense those kind of, what do we call them? Maybe like a micro shift in us, right? They can feel when we tighten a little or when we soften, when we pull away a little bit or when we lean in. And they may not even consciously know that, right? But it can impact the conversation. So this is happening in real time, right? So the client comes in with everything that's going on in their life. We come in with everything that's going on in our life, and we're in conversation together. And our nervous systems are there together. Right? And inevitably, when this happens, sometimes there are ruptures in the relationship, right? The psychologized language is rupture and repair. You know, we might also call it like misattunement. I think some simpler ways of saying this is just misunderstanding one another. And those sorts of moments are actually a brilliant part of therapy. You know, when we as therapists can say something like, you know, gosh, I missed what you were saying there. Or maybe I noticed myself feeling defensive, or we say something and then we say, gosh, that landed wrong. You know, there's a unique opportunity in that therapeutic relationship for those sort of what, you know, is now called rupture and repair. Let me give you an example of how this can look. And it's an example that I've noticed that can sometimes come up for me in real time that I have to be careful of. And I'm going to speak about it generally, right? But let's say that I come into a session and I'm feeling maybe a little protective, maybe slightly angry or uncertain with someone in my life. You know what that feels like. You know, you got a little bit of an edge to you. And I'm not talking about like I've got a chip on my shoulder. I've just got a little bit of an edge to me because of something that's going on in my life. And now let's say the client is sharing something about a relationship with someone in their life. If I'm feeling a bit protective about someone in my life or a little bit angry, irritated, I might subtly push that person that I'm in conversation with towards a confrontation. Now, the point isn't so much whether the confrontation would be useful or not useful. The point is that's what I would be doing without even realizing it, right? And I think if we actually tune in to who we are as people and what we're feeling in any given moment, we might notice that, you know, you can reverse this too, right? You can reverse it. And let's say that I'm feeling really loving and connected and forgiving. Well, I could push someone away from confrontation, right? Just by the questions that I ask. As a narrative therapist, the questions that I ask, right? And this is uncomfortable, I think, sometimes for us as therapists to acknowledge that we may participate in this, but we absolutely do. I found it helpful sometimes to ask the clients I work with what they imagine about my inner world. Right? this isn't a question that just comes out of the blue, right? But there are times where it can be really helpful to have conversations about that, and also to invite them to notice shifts in me and to name those. Again, I think the crux of this idea is therapy is two nervous systems, and two nervous systems that are in contact, in connection in some way. Not in connection perfectly, I don't think in a neutral way, but hopefully in a responsive way. So the goal here isn't to erase our humanity as therapists. It's in some way to normalize it, make sure that it doesn't have to hide, but also that it doesn't have to dominate the session, right? And what I invite people to do is be curious. Be curious. Be curious about the moods you're bringing in to your sessions. What history are you bringing in? How is culture showing up? What are your blind spots? What are your preferences, etc.? And if we can be curious about this, we might just be able to notice how this is showing up with the people we serve. And hopefully then it adds a little bit of humanity to the entire process. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to this Therapist Confidential short, and I'll talk with you again soon.